Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in and watching this video on Intaglio printing with boxboard. Some of the materials that you need are going to be Intaglio printing ink first up. I use a oil-based printing ink, but it is actually water wash-up, so it's great for the classroom. The Akua inks is a much easier one to use. It is a bit thinner. The Caligo or the Cranfield one is a professional quality one, so it does give you a really beautiful print, but it is a bit harder to wash up and to clean up in the classroom. You're also going to need a plastic card. So old credit cards are really good for this. These are just bus transport cards. If you don't have access to those, just any bit of really firm cardboard with a nice hard edge will do the job. You'll also see in this photo I've got, it's not a tarlatan. Tarlatan is the traditional material used, but it's too rough for the cardboard. This is a softer cloth. You can use something like a cheesecloth as well. So something that's a very open weave, cotton, because you can just rewash it and use it. I just wash them out after every lesson. And you'll also need something to polish the plate with. So we use phone books. They're getting really hard to get a hold of now, so start collecting them. But you can also use things like butcher's paper, or old um, thin brown paper bags will also do the job if they're cut down just into small squares. I just use popsicle sticks to take the ink out of the container. If the ink's been sitting around for a while, it does need to be stirred up, or it needs to use a palette knife and onto a piece of glass and then warmed up and just manipulated. So, but I find that the Akua ink is usually pretty good and ready to go. Okay, so what we can see here is a student who has etched her plate, the cardboard box board, and she's just used a plastic palette knife to take a little bit of ink out of the main container. About half a teaspoon is probably the amount to use, and she's just pulled it over the plate and then just using that plastic card or the piece of cardboard to really pull the ink from the middle out to all of the edges. I can see here she's obviously just got something sitting underneath that plate that she's trying to get out of the way. But you'll see that she will pull the ink all the way down to the edges. And then the next step is to actually remove as much of that ink as you can. And I always tell students at this point that once they've got that ink scraped over the plate, to then remove as much as they can. And we just again use that plastic scraper to remove the ink and return it back to the main bottle. I often actually have little like smaller jars. You can see there she's holding a smaller jar, and I decant ink out of the main containers into those smaller jars, just so that if they do get mixed up, it doesn't really matter, because sometimes you can see in the background the other student is using a blue ink. The blue and the black ink actually work really nice together, and students will go from a blue to a black or brown to the blue and things like that. So sometimes the inks do get a bit mixed up. Okay, so you can see in the background the blue one that he's just removing that ink, and then the student at the front here is using that cheesecloth or the tarlatan style cloth to just lightly remove that first layer of ink from the plate. You don't want to use that fabric too much because it will dig out the ink from those incised lines, which is what you don't want. So this is just really to get rid of that main layer down so that you can see the box board enough. So it's important to kind of have a little flat area on that fabric, so just constantly changing it around so that the base of it isn't all scrunched up, that's actually a fairly flat area. So now we're polishing. I actually tell the students to not wear gloves. They're okay with getting it on their hands. I do have the students wear, not wear, but put on a barrier cream before they start to protect their hands. But having the hands themselves and the ink on them actually makes this process a lot easier. The ink on your hands actually holds the paper and actually allows you to polish it better. If you're wearing gloves, you kind of can't feel that process happening, and it also doesn't, I guess, attach to the polishing paper as well as what it could do. So this is the longest process. You can see here she's just noticed an area where she's taken too much ink off, so she's added a bit more on and just has to go back in and polishing. So this is where students kind of don't tend to polish enough. They need to take it down, particularly the large open areas where there's no lines, until you can see the paper fairly clearly. Once the students get to know the process, they'll end up really working out where they want to leave some darker areas. So here you can see I'm just demonstrating to her about the polishing off and then to use the cotton buds to actually really remove some areas to brighten them up. And so she'll continue polishing, and then we'll see her using the cotton buds to highlight some areas and then do a final polish as well. So just a little chat about classroom management around this process. It's quite messy. I have 5 stations set up, so there's 3 people that can work in this area that she's in at the moment, and behind her is another table where 2 can work in. Lots of newspaper. Make sure that there is a bin in each location that the kids are working, and you can see these sheets of paper that they're polishing off, whether they're the cut up piece of paper or the newspaper, not the newspaper, the phone book pages. Just get the kids into the habit of putting them straight into the rubbish bin as soon as they're done with them. Otherwise, you just find it just becomes really messy around the area as well. I usually try and keep my hands fairly clean, or I allocate one student who is the clean hands person. I'll sometimes have the classes work with a buddy, so one person is inking and one person is the clean hands, and then they swap over. So you can see here she's now doing the refined polishing of areas. So she's just using cotton buds to really lighten up those areas, and she'll do a final polish once we've done this area as well. Okay, so now it's time to print, and this is where you need your clean hands person. So prior to starting this, I have an area of wet paper. So you've got to have wet paper to do this etching print. And I have just a piece of plastic that has sheets of A3 paper in it, and they've just been sprayed with a water bottle spray and been sitting for about 10 minutes. When you're ready to use a piece, use a paper towel to wipe the excess water off it. It needs to be damp, not wet. And then your clean hands person will grab one of those pieces of paper and will carry that over to the printing press, and they will then lay that paper onto the printing press ready for it to go through the rollers. So this is where the magic happens, and it's usually the wow moment for the students the first time they do this is they pull it back. They suddenly get the whole process and what happens from the etching through to the printing process. This first time through is where students will go, oh, I missed some areas, I've got to go back and etch them, so use it as an artist proof. But you can see in this one that grunginess around the outside contrasted with those highlighted areas within the creature itself are really effective. It's a great task. Kids love this, and you get different results every time you do it. And even the students that don't do a really great job at the collage or the etching can usually find a way to make the print look decent and and come up with a good image at the end. So I hope you enjoyed this process and love to see the work that you do with your classes moving forward with it.